Well, good morning, church. Thank you for joining us for our deep dive today. Now, if you've never read Acts chapter 5 before, this can really be kind of a passage where we go, wait a minute, two people were struck dead because they told a lie? And I think for us really to understand this, we need to understand the larger context. First, Jesus early on told his disciples to beware the yeast of the Pharisees. And he said that in terms of if you put yeast into dough, you can never get the yeast out of the dough. Once it's in there, it's in there. I mean, it cannot be separated. And the yeast of the Pharisees were that they were hypocrites. That's what Jesus called them. Now, the word hypocrite literally in the Greek means actor. And the fact was they were acting out a role to impress an audience. If you looked at the Pharisees, they were far more concerned with what people saw than what God saw. That's why Jesus would say, don't be like the Pharisees, but when you pray, pray in private. See, the Pharisees loved to pray in public so people could see it and they could be impressed. When they fasted, Jesus said again to keep it a secret. The Pharisees would purposely make themselves look awful and put on sackcloth and kind of show the fact to impress others. Look, I'm fasting again. And what Jesus wanted the disciples to know is he wanted them to be real and for them to be more concerned with what God saw than what others saw. So here we have the setting. If you read the previous section, Barnabas has just given money to the church. He sold a piece of land, he gave it. And so Barnabas gets, recognized, he gets praised. Even though he did it for the right reason, he was wanting to please God, he's wanting to help others, yet everybody knows about Barnabas because he does that. And then there's this couple, we don't know much about them. Their name's Ananias and Sapphira. And they have some property they can sell, and they come up with a plan. Hey, let's sell it. And we'll say that we're giving them all the money and we'll give them some, but we'll keep some. Therefore, we get the profit of the sale, but everybody will think that we're great like Barnabas was. And so Ananias gives this and says he's given it. This is what I sold. I give it to the church. And Peter, inspired by the Holy Spirit, knows he's lying. And he calls him on that. And he lets him know, listen, while you had the land, it was yours. No one was forcing you to give. You could have just given a portion, that'd have been fine, but what you've done is lied, and because of that, you're going to die. And he drops dead. And then Sapphira comes in, and he basically tries to confirm the story with her. She doesn't know her husband's dead, and when she lies also, she dies. And right after that, you see that kind of a fear goes among the church, and even those who aren't believers. And I think this is such a tough call, such a tough call of accountability, because this was the beginning of the church. As a matter of fact, in this chapter is the very first time the word church is ever used, speaking of the universal church of God, the believers in the world. And I think, that the Holy Spirit, God is setting a high standard to say, listen, don't be like the Pharisees. Don't be actors. Don't try to impress people. Don't lie. And that's why it was called so toughly. Now, I know for us, we have to be honest. Do we struggle more when we fail if no one's looking, or when we mess up and others are looking? See, when no one's looking, God is looking, and it should bother us when we sin, when we disobey God, even if God is the only one looking. And if we're more concerned with others seeing us, in other words, if we're not seeing, is it really wrong? I asked a children's church once when I was teaching to define sin, and a little 7-year-old boy raised his hand and says, sin is when you do something wrong and you get caught. Now, isn't it sad that for a lot of us, that really is what sin is? No one sees it. It's okay. It's only when I get caught. And see, here's the warning. Be careful not to live a duplicit life. Be careful not to be that person who presents themselves one way in public, but they live another way in private. That's like the lukewarm that's talked about in the book of Revelation. And that word lukewarm doesn't mean a temperature between hot and cold. The way it's used there, it's talking about mixing hot and mixing cold, and the result is lukewarm. See, we want to be true. We want to be honorable. We want to please God. And our drive should not be what others see, but pleasing God, even if He's the only one that sees. Thank you guys for joining us for our deep dive. I hope you continue tomorrow. Thank you for being on this journey.